early on, there are 46% of those deaths occurring on the day of vaccination or within 1 or 2 days.
In this episode, I sit down with Senator Ron Johnson to discuss the release of 11 million pages of COVID-related documents, which reveal safety signals for myocarditis and ischemic stroke that were downplayed by the CDC.
One of the first things we put in the search engine was myocarditis. We saw that they absolutely had and admitted that they had a safety signal on myocarditis, and they hid it.
Johnson argues the CDC obscured clear warning signs.
I didn't need a proportional reporting ratio analysis. I didn't need empirical Bayesian analysis to tell me there was something seriously wrong here.
He points to a lack of transparency and a suppression of concerning findings.
The main point I wanted to make in the letter that we wrote to HHS about this ischemic stroke is we also found out the fact that they were well aware of the inadequacy of their safety surveillance analysis systems. You have to restore integrity to science. Science has been corrupted.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Senator Ron Johnson, such a pleasure to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Thanks for having me on.
You just recently had a large document dump related to, let's just call it COVID data. So tell me about why you chose to publish what you did recently.
Well, we got the document dump probably about a year ago now. I mean, this is with RFK Jr. coming in as Secretary of HHS, promising radical transparency. I provided him a friendly subpoena to just help prompt the people underneath him to support him in his desire to let the public, have the information the public deserves. And unfortunately, the agency itself did not respond to our specific document request, which is our preference, so that they've got to sort through it as opposed to us. But I think Bobby got a little frustrated because we weren't getting the information, so he really just ordered give them information. So we thought it was originally about 8 million pages. I think it ends up being about 11 million pages. And so now you have to use AI, and people think AI is just a real, like a miracle, and it is. But you still have 11 million pages to sift through, and you have to know exactly what the search terms are. And as I talk to my staff, they'll put in one of these adverse events for the COVID injection, and they get 200,000 pages. So now you have to sift it. So it's an iterative process. But early in that iterative process, one of the first things we put in the search engine was myocarditis. And the staff, sifting through all those thousands and thousands of pages that inquiry provided, we saw that they absolutely had and admitted that they had a safety signal on myocarditis. This is by about May of 2021, and they hid it. That they didn't immediately issue a warning on the Health Alert Network. They downplayed it in any communication. So we held our first hearing as chairman of PSI, Permanent Subcommittee Investigation. We held our first hearing, I think, in May of 2025 with that revelation, knowing that was just the tip of the iceberg.
If I can just comment, but we did know that there was some kind of signal around myocarditis. I think that was one of the few things that we did know. But could you just clarify what you mean when you say?
So we knew that like by January, February of 2021. The Israelis were asking CDC about it because they were seeing it with the myocarditis in particularly young men. Were you seeing a safety signal? So that's what kind of prompted them to have this internal communication. And what we revealed is the CDC had a safety signal, and they didn't immediately warn people. They downplayed it. They hid it, okay? So now fast forward, we continue to sift through documents, and my staff then determined that they also were seeing a safety signal on ischemic stroke in people over 65 toward the tail end of 2022 into 2023, week after week after week. So this is a consistent safety signal showing up with the bivalent booster. And within those communications, once again, you see that, okay, they've got this, issue a study, or didn't issue a study, but they produced a study or had a study conducted for them. There were points in there, they say, well, the study's complete, but they're not showing the results of it. Then when people ask for the results, well, the study's not complete. So they're just obfuscating the whole issue. And once again, they didn't issue an alert on the Health Alert Network. When they actually did write about it, they switched the internal communication from moderate risk to slight risk. So again, so you got myocarditis, you got ischemic stroke over 65. And one of my concerns about producing this information seems, okay, well, that's all it is. Okay, I mean, the COVID injection was so beneficial. You know, it saved 3 million lives, and I want to talk about that claim, okay? Saved 3 million lives, so, okay, you always have side effects, right? But the main point I wanted to make in the letter that we wrote to HHS about this ischemic stroke, and the hearing we'll probably have toward the tail end of April, is we also found out and uncovered the fact that they were well aware of the inadequacy of their safety surveillance analysis systems. You know, I know Epoch Times very early on got their PRR, which was showing safety signals all over the place, but then CDC said, oh, but that's a bad system. You know, we're really relying on empirical Bayesian analysis, okay? You know, make it sound like this is all this complex analysis and stuff. But they knew within their analysis of the empirical Bayesian system that there's a situation called masking. So in particular with the COVID injections, you had Pfizer and you had Moderna. Very similar platforms. They're both mRNA, very similar types of adverse events, very similar types of deaths. I mean, they're very similar. So what CDC did in their analysis is they would compare Pfizer. Let's say there were 10,000 deaths in Pfizer. They would be comparing Pfizer to Moderna and all the vaccines. So let's say you had 10,000 deaths with Moderna, 10,000 deaths with Pfizer, and 1,000 deaths with other vaccines. So now you're comparing Pfizer 10,000 deaths with the Moderna and all their vaccines at 11,000. You go, oh, there's no significant safety signals. It's masked. Now switch it. Now you're looking at Moderna. You're comparing Moderna to Pfizer in all their vaccines. So you're comparing 10,000 adverse events or deaths with 11,000. You mask the signal, and they knew it. They fully understood that. And again, you know, just lay people like ourselves, as we're looking at this in 2021, and you're seeing charts that show the number of deaths due to vaccines going back 26 years. It's just this, you know, pretty steady line, not very many per year.
Now you're talking about VAERS data, right?
VAERS data.
Okay.
All of a sudden in 2021, it just spikes. It's like, I didn't need a proportional reporting ratio analysis. I didn't need empirical Bayesian analysis to tell me there was something seriously wrong here. You know, I remember publishing my VAERS charts where there are a couple thousand deaths, and then more 1,000 deaths, then 10,000, 20, and we're up to about 39,000 deaths. Early on, there are 46% of those deaths occurring on the day of vaccination or within 1 or 2 days. Now we're about 24% of the 39,000 deaths reported worldwide on VAERS, 24% are occurring on the day of vaccination within 1 or 2 days. And they'll say, well, you know, VAERS doesn't prove causation. I mean, that's a heck of a correlation.
Well, but also now we can see, you know, looking back very clearly, I mean, some people saw it earlier, I think, but there was a huge disincentive to write those reports in the first place. Right.
Yeah, they did not want to create vaccine hesitancy. Again, you know, when we release this, again, we now have the documents, so now we're conducting interviews. And so we want to complete those interviews before I publish all the results. But within those documents, you're seeing people make those kind of comments. So I got to remind you guys, the administration, they really want to make sure that everybody gets these boosters. You know, so in other words, don't publicize this, you know, downplay this, hide this, because we don't want to create vaccine hesitancy.
Right.
But on this issue of masking, that really is the, you know.
It sounds crazy. If I may, just, sure. I have to comment on this. Like, it just doesn't make sense as someone who's, you know, done, say, you know, an analysis and experimental design and something in my life, right? It doesn't seem to make sense to me to test an adverse event of one vaccine versus another one. You would need to have something that you need to have some sort of control group, or you're like lacking.
So by
control,
the way,
right?
that's now you're talking about the childhood vaccine schedule as well. I mean, as Aaron Siri has pointed out, and Bobby Kennedy, they've never tested any of the vaccines on the current childhood schedule against a true placebo. They're always doing it against the previous version, or the vaccine with all the adjuvant, you know, without necessarily the live virus. I mean, they're never testing it against strictly saline. But when it comes to COVID,
you told me that they're looking at Pfizer versus Moderna, and they're saying that they're similar, but that's not a test for adverse events, is it?
What they should have done is they should have just tested Pfizer, as standalone against all other vaccines, excluding the COVID vaccines.
Okay.
Okay. And again, that's what the simple charts would do. When you're seeing, maybe 100 deaths a year due to vaccines, whatever, and then all of a sudden we've got 8,000 in a year. You go back to swine flu, where they had finally about 3 dozen deaths reported and about 400 cases of Guillain-Barré disease. They pulled that vaccine out of the market. And yet, when I talked to Francis Collins at the end of April, when there were a few thousand deaths occurring on VAERS, he said, well, Senator, we've attributed about 6 deaths to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, thrombosis with the women of childbearing age. So we've attributed 6 deaths, but, Senator, people die. But 46% of these deaths are occurring on the day of vaccination or within 1 or 2 days. I mean, you're not concerned about that? No. Or if they were concerned, they were far more concerned about the fact that their end of the pandemic, their solution, their vaccine, I call them injections. You can't create vaccine hesitancy. Again, the pandemic was completely mismanaged from the PCR testing all the way down. And unfortunately, all the people that mismanaged it, all the people that contributed to this management, which is the people in the federal health agencies, Fauci, Collins, all those people, the entire medical establishment, members of Congress who are pushing the COVID injection on their constituents, this entire group, nobody wants to admit they're wrong. So we have not had a COVID reckoning. We have not really taken a look at that critically and said, we completely blew this, okay? And lives were destroyed because of the horrific mistakes we made in ignoring early treatment, sabotaging things like ivermectin, budesonide, these other molecules that did work, should have been fully explored, should have been fully tested, should have been recommended, should have been used. There's a great anecdote of an attorney who was contacted by these families who their loved ones are in a hospital. Oftentimes held against their will, because once you were checked in, you couldn't check out, like Hotel California. And they were just begging the hospital administration, the doctors, please just try ivermectin. Just try. Nope, won't do it. So they started taking these hospitals to court. And this attorney just became specialized in this. And I don't know the exact numbers. This is close. Of the 40 cases he won, only 1 person died. In other words, the hospitals were forced to give their loved one ivermectin or one of these treatments. Of the 40 cases he lost, they all died. Now, I know that's not a random controlled, double placebo blind, blah, 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 but it's pretty strong evidence, just as the basic VAERS was strong evidence. So within these documents now, we know, one of the communications is showing the results of a more sophisticated system that would have unmasked this, which was being pushed on people like Peter Marks early in 2021. I mean, they were told our current surveillance system is inadequate. It is going to mask. This is going to be a problem. And those people are referred to as pests. Don't give them any more data. Don't tell them to stop their work. Okay, so they were being purposely told, we don't want to know this. Okay, but they had a better system. They were trying to get them to use, and so these people are communicating themselves using this better system. They show this report that there are 49 instances of extreme masking, and out of that, 25 are showing a safety signal. Things like 7 deaths, stroke. So they knew this, and the people at CDC ignored it. They shoved these people off to the side. They told them to stop their work. We don't want, the only analysis we're interested in looking at is the stuff that we want to look at that masks this, and they knew it. So, I think this is a bombshell. I think this is a huge scandal. The question is, when we hold our hearing, when we present our report and our findings and finish our interviews, will the legacy media cover this? Will the mainstream, will the corporate media cover this at all? They're part of the cover-up.
Senator, just one moment. We're going to take a break, and folks, we're going to be right back. And we're back with Senator Ron Johnson, chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations in the U.S. Senate. You mentioned the hearing that you held about giving a platform for the vaccine-injured people. As you well know, my wife and I, we made a film about the plight of these people. Where are we at right now?
Well, I know, I've been told Jay Bhattacharya has agreed to produce an ICD code, which is what doctors and all healthcare providers use to get reimbursed for a particular health condition. So the COVID vaccine or injection injured have never had an ICD code. So they've got to, if they seek medical care, they're having to do it for something else. So that's incredibly important for the injection injured that they have that code to acknowledge the fact that their condition, the things they're suffering from, their disability has been caused more than likely by that COVID injection. That'd be very helpful. So that's some progress.
Well, just it helps you to know that there's these are the types of treatments which you might consider. These are the types of.
But here we are, 6 years past the pandemic, we still don't have the ICD code. They've been asking for it for quite some time. So maybe they'll get it now. So that's some progress. As I mentioned, that video I saw of this gentleman who's got a central line in his, in his aorta, getting treatment in Japan. I think by and large the COVID injection injured are still being largely gaslit and ignored and being told it's all in their head, or that kind of stuff happens. You have sudden stroke.
You mentioned you got this 11 million page document dump from Bobby Kennedy, chief of HHS. Where do you think the Maha agenda that Bobby kind of took the mantle, so to speak, at HHS on, where do you think it's been most effective, most successful, and how consequential is that?
Well, I think without a doubt, in terms of food, how do we evaluate ingredients, what's safe to eat, what's healthier to eat? That is something that is supported by everybody. I mean, that's completely nonpartisan versus, the things I've been talking about here in terms of vaccines, the COVID injection. People do not want to admit that maybe they shouldn't have fully vaccinated their children, or they maybe shouldn't have taken that COVID shot, or that maybe that COVID injection might result in cancer down the road. I mean, I fully understand that. I just can't ignore reality. But when it comes to food, I think we all realize, I probably shouldn't be eating those, those Skittles or,
Yes.
So I mean that resonates. And again, I don't think we should, from my standpoint, we should know so much more about nutrition and the human body and what we should put in it, what we shouldn't. Some of these supplements, that type of thing. We should just know a whole lot more. What are the right levels of different things we can test with blood tests, that kind of stuff. We should know so much more, and we don't, because we've been so dedicated to, we just want a pill. Where's the pill? Again, I think Casey Means, her book Good Energy, I thought it was just beautifully written from a standpoint of, our bodies, we need energy, right? I mean, everything needs energy. Our energy comes from the sun, and through photosynthesis we get the plants collect it, then animals eat the plants, and they convert that energy into meat, and then we have to convert both plant and animal into energy in our bodies. And that's what our mitochondria does. And so if we harm our mitochondrial health, if we inhibit its ability to convert that food into energy, we're going to not be healthy, because if we can't convert to energy, we can't heal ourselves.
So something that you were involved in the previous Congress, which is pretty close to my heart, I just wrote a book about it. The book is Killed to Order. It's about China's forced organ harvesting industry. You were in the Senate behind the Falun Gong Protection Act. It didn't pass that time. It just has been reintroduced as a bipartisan Falun Gong and Victims of Forced Organ Harvesting Protection Act.
That's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful, but I think it's it seems to me like
you need an acronym for that.
I don't want to tout my own horn.
Well, no.
Here.
Let me tout it. Okay, you've done a phenomenal job researching this and exposing it and highlighting it. I mean, you've done a phenomenal job. I can't explain why we didn't pass that a few years ago. I'm no longer in foreign relations, so other people have taken the lead on that. I've talked to Chairman of Foreign Relations. He doesn't seem opposed to it. So I think because of all the work you've done, you've set up the conditions where just get that in a markup on foreign relations, bring that to the floor of the Senate, unanimous consent. I don't see how anybody could object to that law. Congress is so dysfunctional. There's so many priorities tugging at us all that there needs to be a champion, and there needs to be public support. And that means things have to be exposed. And you've done that.
Final question. You told me some time ago that the reason you ran again was mainly because you wanted to help these people who have been, COVID injection injured, to use your term. I asked you a little bit earlier how that's coming. How far do you think you can take this?
Probably the main reason I ran is I couldn't turn my back on my country. I realize this is a unique position. I'm a reasonably unique individual here in Washington, D.C. with my manufacturing background and my willingness to speak out. Okay, go against the grain, go against the narrative. But a big part of that was nobody else was even acknowledging the vaccine or the injection injured, much less working to help them out, give them a platform or advocate for them. So no. That was a big part of my running in 2022, and we're making progress. I mean, one of the reasons you had me on is because now we have gotten these documents to just prove that will expose what happened. It starts that COVID reckoning. Again, it's frustrating. I mean, I think I think I know what happened. I understand the corruption, but the general population doesn't know it. And until you can show it in all its gory detail, until you have the absolute proof, until you can show, here's an email, this is what they said. I'm not telling you this is what I assumed happened. This is what they said. Boy, we can't publish that. Take that information. Tell her not to give us any more. Don't do any more of these studies. We don't want to know that all these adverse events are masked, that there's safety signals for 25 of them, including sudden death and stroke. We don't want to know that. Tell her to shut up. She's a pest. So now we've got that. Hopefully that will be a blockbuster, so the legacy media will actually pay attention. What's happened, for example, the Voice of the Vaccine Injured, I told you my ranking member went out in a press conference, said, I hope nobody watches this. It's not credible. It's not worthy of attention. So we had one hit piece pre-written by, I think, MSN Now, is that what they call it now? And that was it. So what the press is basically doing in reaction to mine is not necessarily attacking me so much anymore. They just ignore what I'm revealing. They're ignoring what I expose. So I appreciate this opportunity. I appreciate really everything the Epoch Times does. I mean, you're a true journalistic effort now. We've lost that. We don't have that in the legacy media. It's a shame. But I appreciate you giving me this platform, tolerating me for an hour, and thanks.
Well, Senator Ron Johnson, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you all for joining Senator Ron Johnson and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Yanya Kellek.